Hello, and welcome back to the Whispered Lore. Settle in and allow the noise of the world to fade into a gentle quiet. Tonight, our journey takes us high into the Andes. Along the stone-paved paths of the Qhapaq Ñan, we will explore the great Inca Road System, a network so vast and vital it was known as the Empire's Spine. But a spine requires more than just structure. It needs constant, careful tending. So let your mind drift as we consider the quiet, rhythmic work that sustained it. We will uncover the secrets of its intricate logistics and tireless maintenance, the unseen pulse of an ancient civilization. There is no need to focus. Just rest and listen. In the vast and varied topography of western South America, etched into the earth with a permanence that defies centuries, lies a monumental achievement of human engineering and social organization. It is a network of pathways, a system of arteries and capillaries that once pulsed with the life of an empire. This is the great Inca Road, the Qhapaq Ñan. To comprehend the Inca Empire, or Tawantinsuyu, the four parts together, one must first comprehend its spine. For the road system was not merely an accessory to the empire. It was its precondition, its organizing principle, its very nervous system. This is an introduction to that system, to the veins of Tawantinsuyu. The Qhapaq Ñan was not a single road, but an intricate, articulated network stretching for over 40,000 kilometers, or approximately 25,000 miles. Its two primary longitudinal arteries ran roughly parallel to each other. The first, the Andean trunk, traversed the formidable highlands of the Andes, a path of stone and determination clinging to mountain slopes, crossing deep ravines, and ascending to altitudes that would leave a modern traveler breathless. The second, the coastal trunk, navigated the arid plains and desert valleys of the Pacific littoral, a lower, hotter, but no less challenging route. Connecting these two main spines was a complex web of transverse roads, climbing and descending the steep gradients between the highlands and the coast, linking the diverse ecological zones that were the source of the empire's great wealth and stability. This system was the physical manifestation of a profound understanding of logistics. The Inca state, without the benefit of the wheel, without draft animals larger than the llama, and without a system of alphabetic writing, administered a territory that stretched from modern-day southern Colombia to central Chile. Such a feat of governance would have been impossible without a means of rapid communication, swift military deployment, and the efficient redistribution of goods. The Qhapaq Ñan facilitated all of this. It was a project of statecraft, built and maintained not for the common traveler, but for the express purposes of the Sapa Inca, the emperor in Cusco. Access was restricted. Movement was controlled. The road was an instrument of power. To understand the road is to understand its constituent parts, the meticulous details of its construction and maintenance. The engineering varied, adapting with remarkable ingenuity to the surrounding environment. In the high Andes, where rainfall and erosion were constant threats, the roads were often paved with carefully fitted flagstones. Where the terrain became impossibly steep, the Inca engineers did not detour. They built stairways, sometimes thousands of steps carved directly into the bedrock, ascending sheer mountain faces. They constructed massive retaining walls to secure the roadbed against landslides and buttressed the paths along precipitous drops. Drainage was a primary concern. Stone-lined channels and culverts were integrated into the road's design to divert water, preserving the integrity of the surface and preventing it from washing away during the torrential seasonal rains. Across marshy highlands or wetlands, they built raised causeways of stone and earth, lifting the path above the saturated ground, ensuring it remained passable year-round. In the coastal desert, the road was often a simpler affair. Here the path was typically marked by low walls of stone or adobe brick on either side, or sometimes by a series of posts to prevent travelers from straying into the shifting sands. The road's width was standardized where possible, often between 1 and 4 meters, but could expand to over 15 meters for ceremonial avenues near major administrative centers like Cusco. This physical infrastructure, however, was inert without the human and logistical systems that gave it life. The story of the Inca Road System, the Qhapaq Ñan, is often told as a singular marvel of engineering, a monumental network willed into existence by the centralized power of the Tawantinsuyu. This narrative, while compelling, overlooks a deeper, more layered history. The great Inca spine was not laid upon a virgin landscape. Rather, it was a profound act of synthesis, of integration, and of imposition upon a vast and ancient tapestry of pathways, trails, and engineered roads that had been evolving for more than a millennium. To truly understand the Inca achievement, we must first listen for the echoes of the past, for the faint but persistent footprints of the empires that came before. We must turn our attention to the pre-Inca highways. The most significant predecessors to the Inca in the art of large-scale road construction were the Wari or Huari, a powerful and expansive state that flourished in the central Andean highlands from approximately 600 to 1100 AD. The Wari Empire, centered on its eponymous capital near modern-day Ayacucho, was a polity built on administrative control over a diverse and challenging geography. To project power, move armies, and channel tribute from its provincial centers, the Wari required a logistical infrastructure far more sophisticated than simple local trails. They became the first true highway engineers of the Andes. Wari roads are distinct from their more famous Inca successors. Archaeologically, they are identified by their construction techniques and their direct association with Wari administrative sites. Unlike the often sinuous Inca roads that meticulously followed the contours of the land, Wari roads were frequently characterized by their bold, straight alignments. They cut directly across the landscape, sometimes for dozens of kilometers, with a startling disregard for topographical impediments. This suggests a primary purpose of rapid, direct transit for state-sponsored travelers, such as military columns or official caravans, rather than the accommodation of local, everyday traffic. The construction itself was formidable, though typically less refined than later Inca work. Wari engineers often built roads of considerable width, sometimes reaching up to 15 meters across. The roadway was typically cleared of surface vegetation and large rocks. The surface was then built up using packed earth, gravel, and locally sourced stone. In many sections, the edges were demarcated by lines of fieldstones, creating a clear, defined corridor. Where the road traversed unstable slopes, the Wari constructed retaining walls of rough-hewn stone mortared with clay. In marshy or seasonally wet areas, they built low causeways, elevating the road surface on a bed of rock and fill to ensure year-round passability. These roads were not universally paved in the manner of the finest Inca highways, but their scale and engineering intent are unmistakable. The evidence for this network radiates from major Wari centers. From the sprawling capital of Wari, and from planned administrative installations like Piquilacta in the Cusco Valley and Cerro Bol in the Moquegua region, archaeologists have traced these broad, straight avenues extending outwards, physically linking the imperial core to its peripheries. The discovery of Wari ceramics, shattered and discarded by travelers along these routes, provides a datable material signature. Furthermore, in many locations, archaeological stratigraphy reveals a clear sequence, a lower, broader Wari-era road surface, upon which the Inca later built their own narrower, more finely paved road. The Inca did not invent the route, they inherited it, improved it, and repurposed it for their own imperial project. Contemporaneously with the Wari in the highlands, another great civilization, the Tiwanaku, was developing its own unique infrastructural solutions in the southern Andes, centered on the high-altitude basin of Lake Titicaca. The period of Inca history, often referred to as the Great Expansion, primarily associated with the reign of the 9th Sapa Inca, Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui, and his successors, represents a fundamental shift in the scale and character of the Andean state. This transformation, from a regional polity centered in the Cusco Valley to the vast multi-ethnic empire of Tawantinsuyu, was not merely a product of military superiority. It was, at its core, an unparalleled logistical achievement predicated on the systematic and ideologically driven construction of a comprehensive road network, the Qhapaq Ñan. This chapter will examine the symbiotic relationship between imperial expansion and road construction, detailing the methodologies, labor systems, and infrastructural components that allowed the Inca state to project power, move resources, and administer territories on a continental scale. The Inca paradigm of conquest was one of integration rather than simple extraction. Upon the subjugation of a new territory, the state's first priority was to physically and administratively bind it to the imperial heartland of Cusco. The primary instrument of this integration was the road. Immediately following a military campaign, state engineers and surveyors would arrive to map out the most efficient route for a new branch of the Qhapaq Ñan. This was a profoundly symbolic act, a tangible imposition of Inca order upon a newly acquired landscape. The road was not an afterthought. It was the mechanism of consolidation. Its construction signified the permanence of Inca rule, transforming a conquered periphery into a functional component of the imperial body. The labor for these monumental undertakings was sourced through the mita system, a form of rotational corvée labor tax. Each able-bodied male in a community, or elu, was required to contribute a set period of labor to the state each year. This was not slave labor, but a structured, reciprocal obligation. The state, in turn, provided the tools, food, and lodging for the mitma laborers. This system allowed the Inca to mobilize immense workforces, numbering in the tens of thousands, for specific, large-scale projects, including the construction and, crucially, the maintenance of the road system. The work was often divided into segments, with local communities being responsible for the construction and upkeep of the portion of the road that passed through their lands, a practice which fostered a sense of local investment in the larger imperial project. The engineering of the Qhapaq Ñan was characterized by a pragmatic and sophisticated adaptation to the diverse and often extreme Andean topography. There was no single, uniform road design. Instead, construction techniques were tailored to the specific environmental context. In the arid coastal deserts, the road was often a simple, wide track, cleared of debris, and marked at regular intervals by stone cairns or wooden posts to guide travelers through the shifting sands. The width in these sections could extend to over 15 meters, allowing for the movement of large groups of people and llama caravans in parallel formation. In the highlands, the Puna grasslands, the engineering was more complex. Here, roads were typically paved with fitted flagstones to create a durable, all-weather surface. They were often built with a slightly convex cross-section and flanked by drainage channels to carry away the heavy seasonal rains and prevent erosion. The standard width in the mountains was narrower, typically ranging from 1 to 4 meters. Where the road traversed steep slopes, its integrity was maintained by the construction of extensive retaining walls. These walls, built using the characteristic Inca technique of dry stone masonry, featured precisely cut stones fitted together without mortar. The slight inward batter, or inclination of these walls, provided exceptional stability against the lateral pressure of the earth behind them. The Qhapaq Ñan, the great Inca Road System, was more than a network of pathways. It was an act of sustained, systematic defiance against one of the most formidable geographical barriers on the planet, the Andes Mountains. To maintain its cohesion and facilitate the rapid movement of information, personnel, and resources, the Inca state was required to develop and deploy a sophisticated suite of engineering solutions. This chapter examines these solutions, focusing on the methods by which the Inca spanned chasms, penetrated rock, and stabilized the very ground upon which their empire traveled. We will consider the materials, the labor organization, and the underlying principles that allowed for the construction of bridges, tunnels, and paved roadways, components integral to the function of the empire's spine. The most dramatic and visually arresting of the Inca engineering feats were undoubtedly their bridges. The Andean landscape is fractured by deep river gorges and canyons, some plunging for hundreds of meters. For a road system predicated on directness and speed, detours were an inefficiency to be eliminated. The Inca engineers developed a catalog of bridge types, each adapted to a specific set of topographical and hydrological conditions. The most renowned of these is the suspension bridge, or Qhapaq. These structures, seemingly delicate yet remarkably resilient, were triumphs of organic engineering. The primary construction material was a coarse highland bunchgrass known as ICHU, or Stipa ICHU. In some regions, fibers from the maguey plant were also incorporated. The genius of the Qhapaq lay in the processing of this humble material. After harvesting, the grass fibers were soaked in water to increase their pliability. Individual families, as part of their mite labor obligation to the state, would then twist these dampened fibers into thin cords of a standardized diameter. These primary cords, known as Cusco, were then woven together into progressively larger ropes, or Qhapaq. The final stage involved braiding these intermediate ropes into the enormous main support cables, the Qullqas. These Qullqas, often numbering 4 or 6 for a single bridge, could be as thick as a human torso and possessed immense tensile strength. The construction of the bridge was a communal and often ritualized event. The first challenge was to span the void. A light guide rope would be carried across the chasm, a task sometimes accomplished by a strong swimmer navigating the turbulent river below, or by using a bow to shoot an arrow trailing a thin fiber line. This guide rope was then used to pull the massive Qullqas from one side to the other. On either bank of the canyon, Inca masons would have previously constructed massive stone anchorages. These were not simple abutments, but heavily engineered structures, often with subterranean elements, designed to counteract the immense and constant tension of the bridge cables. The Qullqas were passed through stone-lined apertures, or wrapped around large, deadman-style wooden beams, embedded deep within the masonry. Once the main cables were secured and tensioned, the bridge deck was assembled. 2 of the thickest Qullqas served as the floor, while 2 slightly thinner ones were strung several feet higher to act as handrails. A network of smaller vertical ropes, the huaruncas, was then systematically tied between the floor cables and the handrail cables, creating a secure, cage-like structure. Finally, the walkway itself was formed by laying a mat of small sticks and branches, known as Qullqas, across the 2 floor cables and lashing them tightly into place. The life of an ICHU grass bridge was inherently finite. The organic fibers were susceptible to rot and solar degradation. The Inca solution to this was not to seek a more permanent material, but to embrace a system of regular, planned replacement. The enduring stone, the compacted earth, the precise and unyielding line of the great Inca road, the Qhapaq Ñan, appears to us as a singular monumental achievement, a static artifact carved into the landscape. This perception, however, belies a more complex and fluid reality. The road was not merely built, it was perpetually rebuilt. It was not a monument, but a living organism, subject to the constant, inexorable forces of entropy, erosion, and decay. The Andean climate, with its torrential rains, its cycles of freezing and thawing, and the tectonic instability of the land itself, was a relentless adversary. To counter these forces, the Inca state deployed its single most abundant and powerful resource, human labor, organized with a precision and on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. The mechanism for this monumental undertaking was a system of rotational labor tribute known as the mita. It was not currency, nor was it a tax paid in goods. It was a tax paid in time, in energy, in human effort, a cyclical obligation that bound every able-bodied male subject to the will and the maintenance of the state. The administrative foundation of the mita system was the decimal-based organization of the empire's population. Society was meticulously categorized into nested units. The base unit was the individual household, headed by a tax-paying male known as a Puric. 10 households were grouped under an official. 10 of these groups formed a unit of 100 households, administered by a Pachaka Qhapaq. This decimal hierarchy continued upwards, creating administrative divisions of 1,000 and 10,000 households. This rigid, hierarchical structure was not merely for political control, it was a sophisticated logistical framework for the requisition of labor. At the heart of this system was the census. Periodically, state officials would travel through the provinces, conducting a detailed demographic survey. Their primary recording tool was the Khipu, a complex arrangement of knotted strings. The Qhapaq, the accountants and masters of the Khipu, were the silent bureaucrats of the empire. Through specific colors, knot types, and positions on the strings, they recorded not just the total population, but the age, gender, and physical condition of every individual within a community, or Ailu. This detailed data allowed the central authority in Cusco to calculate, with remarkable accuracy, the total labor potential of any given province. They knew precisely how many men were available for mita service, ensuring that the burden was distributed across the empire, and that no single community would be depleted of its workforce to the point of collapse. When a section of the Qhapaq Ñan required maintenance, the process was initiated through this decimal chain of command. An order would descend from a high-ranking imperial official to the regional governors, and then down to the local leaders, the Qullqas. The Qullqa acted as the crucial intermediary between the state and his people. Based on the Khipu records, he would identify the individuals within his community whose turn it was to fulfill their mita obligation. The selected man, the mitayuk, would prepare to leave his home and his own fields for a period that could last several months. It is essential to understand that this was not a sudden and disruptive summons in the way of a military draft. The mita was a predictable, cyclical part of life, integrated into the annual calendar. The work was often scheduled during the agricultural off-season, after the harvest, and before the next planting, to minimize its impact on the subsistence economy of the Ailu. The system was predicated on a deeply ingrained Andean principle of reciprocity. While the individual served the state, his community did not abandon his family. In the intricate tapestry of the Inca state, the Tawantinsuyu, the vast road network known as the Qhapaq Ñan, served as the warp and weft, binding together disparate geographies and diverse peoples. This network, a marvel of pre-industrial engineering, was more than mere stone and earth. It was the empire's circulatory system, and through these arteries and veins flowed the lifeblood of information, carried not by wheeled vehicles or domesticated beasts of burden, but by the human nervous system of the empire, the Chasquis. This chapter will examine, in granular detail, the organization, function, and significance of this remarkable messenger system, a cornerstone of Inca administration and control. The Chasquis was not simply a runner. He was a specialized civil servant, a living component in a meticulously designed relay machine. The selection process began at a young age. Boys from loyal, established communities, known as Alis, were observed for specific physical and mental attributes. The primary requirements were physiological. Exceptional lung capacity, a critical advantage in the thin air of the high Andes, was paramount. A lean but powerful physique, capable of explosive speed over short distances and sustained endurance over uneven terrain, was equally essential. These were not marathon runners in the modern sense, but sprinters trained for a very specific task: to cover a segment of the road as quickly as humanly possible before passing their burden to the next in line. Training was rigorous and began in adolescence. It involved not only physical conditioning, such as practice runs along designated road segments, but also strict mnemonic exercises. The Chasquis had to be a vessel of perfect recall. The majority of messages were transmitted orally, and the slightest deviation in wording could have significant consequences for provincial administration, military movements, or judicial decrees. Therefore, young trainees were drilled in the art of listening, memorizing, and repeating complex messages verbatim. They were also taught to be observant, to note any unusual conditions along their route, a washed-out bridge, a landslide, unusual troop movements, and to add this intelligence to their primary message. Loyalty to the Sapa Inca was instilled as a foundational principle, a sacred duty upon which the integrity of the entire system rested. The penalty for failing in this duty, whether through negligence or betrayal, was severe. The attire and equipment of a Chasquis were models of functional minimalism. He wore a simple, sleeveless tunic, or unku, made of wool or cotton, which allowed for maximum freedom of movement. On his feet were ushutas, sandals typically made from llama hide or plant fibers, providing protection while retaining a tactile connection to the ground. His identity as an imperial messenger was often signaled by a distinctive headdress, a simple cap or headband adorned with a plume of white feathers, making him instantly recognizable to those he passed on the road and to his waiting counterpart at the next relay station. He carried two essential items. The first was the chuspa, a small, woven bag slung over the shoulder. This bag contained personal effects, most notably a supply of coca leaves. The mild stimulant properties of coca were integral to the Chasquis' performance, serving to numb fatigue, suppress hunger and thirst, and enhance stamina during his intense anaerobic sprints. The second item, often carried in hand, was the pututu, a trumpet made from a conch shell. As the Chasquis neared the end of his designated segment, he would sound the pututu, its deep, resonant call echoing through the mountain valleys. This was a signal to the next runner in the chain to prepare himself, ensuring a seamless, time-efficient handover. The infrastructure that supported the Chasquis was as sophisticated as the runners themselves. The Qhapaq Ñan, the great Inca road, was more than an artery of movement. It was a complete circulatory system, sustaining the empire through a constant, predictable flow of information, goods, and personnel. The heart of this system, its vital organs spaced with geometric precision, was the network of way stations known as Tampus. These structures, often misunderstood as simple ends, were in fact complex logistical nodes, embodying the Inca state's profound understanding of administration, storage, and the physical limitations of travel in the challenging Andean environment. The Tampu network was the tangible expression of imperial foresight, a system designed to ensure that no state-sanctioned traveler, whether a lone messenger or an entire army, would ever be more than a single day's journey from rest and resupply. The principle governing the placement of Tampus was one of rhythm and regularity. Spaced at intervals of approximately 20 to 25 kilometers, a distance corresponding to a standard day's march for a laden llama caravan or a traveling official, the Tampus transformed the immense and often vertical landscape into a series of manageable segments. This standardized spacing was not arbitrary. It was the result of careful calculation, taking into account average walking speeds, the effects of altitude, and the need for regular recuperation. This meticulous planning meant that the state could predict, with a high degree of accuracy, the travel time between any 2 points in the empire, a critical factor for military mobilization and administrative communication. The Tampus were not homogeneous. They existed in a distinct hierarchy, their size and complexity reflecting their location and strategic importance. The most common type was the simple way station, a modest complex of buildings providing basic shelter and sustenance. Further up the hierarchy were larger, more elaborate Tampus, often situated at the junction of 2 or more roads, or in fertile valleys, capable of producing significant agricultural surplus. These functioned as small administrative centers, overseeing the logistics of a particular region. At the apex of the system were the great imperial Tampus, sprawling complexes that were effectively provincial capitals, such as Huánuco Pampa in the Central Highlands or Tambo, Colorado on the coast. These major centers were not just stopping points, but destinations in their own right, featuring not only extensive storage and lodging facilities, but also ceremonial plazas, elite residences, and temples, reflecting their role as seats of imperial power. The architecture of a Tampu was a study in functional pragmatism. adapted to the local environment yet adhering to a recognizable imperial blueprint. Construction typically utilized locally sourced materials. In the highlands, this meant fieldstone, expertly fitted together in the characteristic Qhapaq style of masonry, unworked stones set in a clay mortar, creating walls that were both durable and thermally efficient. In the arid coastal regions, adobe brick was the material of choice. The fundamental architectural unit was the cancha, a rectangular compound enclosed by a high wall with several single-room structures arranged around a central open patio. This layout provided security, organization, and a clear demarcation of space. Within the Tampu complex, different buildings served highly specific functions. The most critical of these were the storehouses, or Qullqas. These were marvels of environmental engineering, designed for the long-term preservation of a vast array of goods. Qullqas could be either circular or rectangular. Circular structures were often used for storing maize, their shape promoting air circulation, while rectangular ones were more common for tubers and textiles. Their design incorporated sophisticated features to combat moisture and pests. Along the vast network of the Qhapaq Ñan, the Great Inca Road, the pulse of the empire was not measured in the footsteps of its messengers or the march of its armies alone. It was measured in a quieter, more constant rhythm, the accumulation and distribution of surplus. To understand the logistical genius of the Tawantinsuyu, one must look away from the paved thoroughfares and up to the dry, windswept hillsides that flank the imperial valleys. Here, arranged in silent, geometric precision, stand the remains of the Qullqas, the state storehouses of the Inca Empire. These structures were not mere granaries. They were the concrete manifestation of the Inca state's power, its foresight, and its profound understanding of economic and social control. The Qullqas system was the engine that fueled the empire, a network of repositories that transformed agricultural abundance into political stability and military might. The architectural design of the Qullqa was a masterclass in functional simplicity and environmental adaptation. Two primary forms dominate the archaeological record: circular structures and rectangular ones. Extensive study suggests a functional division between the two. The circular Qullqas, typically measuring between 3 and 6 meters in diameter, are most commonly associated with the storage of maize, or sara. The conical shape of their high-pitched ICHU grass roofs, combined with their round footprint, is thought to have promoted a specific pattern of air circulation, a gentle, continuous vortex that wicked moisture away from the stored kernels. Rectangular Qullqas, on the other hand, are predominantly linked to the storage of potatoes and their durable, freeze-dried derivé chuño. These structures were often larger and could be more easily subdivided to store different varieties of tubers or other goods. The construction materials were invariably local, a hallmark of Inca pragmatism. The walls were made of uncoursed fieldstone masonry, known as pirca, with stones carefully chosen and fitted together, bound by a simple clay mortar. The floors were a complex system, designed for preservation. They did not sit directly on the earth. Instead, a foundation of larger stones was laid down, creating a raised subfloor. This cavity was then often filled with a layer of coarse sand or gravel, which prevented ground moisture from rising through capillary action. Above this, a pavement of flat stones, or a hard-packed clay surface formed the floor upon which the goods would be placed, often in ceramic jars, woven baskets, or cloth sacks. Perhaps the most critical design element was ventilation. The cool, dry Andean air was the primary preservative. The Qullqas were built to harness it. Their strategic placement on hillsides was the first step, exposing them to constant winds unavailable on the protected valley floors. The walls themselves were perforated with small, stone-lined vents, positioned near the base and again near the roof line. This arrangement created a passive convection system. Cooler, denser air would be drawn in through the lower vents, circulate through the stored goods, and as it warmed and absorbed moisture, it would rise and exit through the upper vents. Furthermore, many Qullqas featured a central, stone-lined channel running beneath the floor, connected to an external air intake. This channel acted as an underground duct, feeding a constant stream of cool, dry air directly into the base of the stored produce, ensuring that even the very center of the stockpile remained aerated. The placement of Qullqa complexes was a deliberate act of large-scale land management. By building on sterile hillsides, the Inca left the fertile, irrigated valley floors free for agriculture. This was a crucial calculation in an environment where every square meter of arable land was precious. The hillside location also offered superior drainage, protecting the stone foundations from waterlogging and decay. The great artery of the Inca Empire, the Qhapaq Ñan, was a monumental feat of engineering, a testament to a centralized will capable of shaping mountains and bridging chasms. Yet, this stone and earth spine, for all its permanence, was inert. It was a conduit, a vessel awaiting the lifeblood that would pulse through it, carrying the resources, information, and authority that constituted the state. This lifeblood did not flow in a rush, but moved at a deliberate, rhythmic, and unceasing pace. It moved on the backs of animals, in long, sinuous processions that were as much a feature of the Andean landscape as the mountains themselves. This was the domain of the Llama caravans, the biological engine that powered the logistical matrix of the Tawantinsuyu. The animal at the heart of this system, the llama, Llama Glama, was not the most powerful beast of burden known to civilization, nor the swiftest. Its utility was not found in brute strength, but in its profound and intricate adaptation to the very specific and demanding environment of the Andes. The llama is a creature born of high altitude. Its physiology is a masterclass in survival within a low-oxygen world. The blood of the llama is characterized by a high concentration of hemoglobin and, more significantly, by red blood cells that are oval or elliptic in shape. This morphology, distinct from the circular cells of most mammals, allows for greater surface area and facilitates more efficient oxygen absorption and circulation in the thin air of the puna, the high alpine grasslands. This intrinsic biological advantage meant that where other animals would falter, growing weak and breathless, the llama could maintain its steady, unhurried gait day after day, ascending to passes well over 4,000 meters above sea level without physiological distress. Its physical structure was equally suited to the terrain. The llama possesses a two-toed foot with a soft, leathery pad on the sole and tough, curved toenails. This design provides a superior grip on uneven and rocky surfaces, far more effective than a solid hoof. It allows the animal to navigate the meticulously crafted but often steep stone stairways of the Qhapaq Ñan with a sure-footedness that minimized the risk of falls and injury to both animal and cargo. This soft-footed gait also had the significant benefit of causing minimal wear and tear on the carefully paved surfaces of the imperial road, a subtle but important factor in the long-term sustainability of the infrastructure. A single llama is not a formidable carrier. The acceptable load for a mature male llama was strictly regulated, averaging between 25 and 30 kilograms. An attempt to overload a llama would result in a famously stubborn refusal to move. The animal would simply lie down, emitting a guttural, gurgling sound of protest, and would not rise until the excess weight was removed. This innate behavioral check prevented the abuse and exhaustion of the animals, ensuring the long-term health of the herds that represented a critical state asset. The power of the system, therefore, lay not in the capacity of the individual, but in the multiplication of this capacity across vast numbers. A state-sponsored caravan could consist of hundreds, sometimes even thousands of llamas, forming a slow-moving river of wool and cargo that stretched for kilometers along the imperial road. The orchestration of such a caravan was a highly specialized endeavor, entrusted to a class of men known as Llama Mishik, or Llama herders. This was not a role for the unskilled. It was a hereditary profession, a body of knowledge passed from father to son, encompassing an intimate understanding of animal husbandry, route finding, weather prediction, and the complex protocols of the state's logistical network. The lead herder was responsible for the welfare of his animals, the security of the cargo, and the adherence to a strict schedule. The Great Road, the Qhapaq Ñan, was not a static achievement, completed and then left to the ages. It was, rather, a dynamic entity, a living artery of the empire that required constant, unceasing attention. Its existence was not a monument to a single act of creation, but a testament to a continuous process of preservation. The forces that sought to unmake the road were as powerful and persistent as the empire itself. Gravity, water, wind, and the slow, inexorable growth of vegetation formed a coalition of entropy, constantly working to reclaim the carefully engineered surfaces and structures. To counter these forces, the Inca state implemented a system of maintenance that was as sophisticated and comprehensive as the road's initial construction. This was a system of constant vigilance. The foundational principle of this system was decentralized, localized responsibility, organized through the institution known as the mita. The mita was a form of public service tribute, a labor tax incumbent upon all able-bodied male subjects of the empire for a set period each year. While often associated with grand construction projects or military campaigns, its most routine and widespread application was in the maintenance of local infrastructure. The empire was divided into administrative regions, which were further subdivided into communities, or atias. Each ailu was assigned direct responsibility for the upkeep of the specific segment of the Qhapaq Ñan that traversed its lands. This was not a suggestion, but a solemn obligation, overseen by the local leader, the Qhapaq. The state of the road was a direct reflection on the diligence of the community and its leadership. The work itself was varied, meticulous, and often arduous. At its most basic level was the simple act of clearing the road surface. Patrols of Métis laborers would walk their designated section, removing loose stones, fallen branches, and any other debris that might impede travel. In agricultural zones, this included the regular removal of animal dung, which could become slippery and degrade the road surface. Weeds and small plants that pushed their way through the cracks between paving stones were painstakingly removed by hand or with simple bronze or hardened wood tools. The edges of the road, often demarcated by a line of stones, had to be kept clear of encroaching vegetation. This was not merely for aesthetics. Overgrown grasses and shrubs could obscure the path, trip travelers, and most critically, their root systems could begin to undermine the road's foundation. For paved sections, the maintenance was more involved. The stone pavers, though expertly laid, were subject to wear from the passage of countless feet and llama trains. A cracked or shifted stone was not ignored. It was carefully pried up using hardwood levers. If it was broken, a replacement had to be sourced. This often meant a trip to a nearby designated quarry, where a new stone of appropriate size and shape would be split and roughly dressed using stone hammers and bronze chisels. The new paver would then be transported back and set carefully into place, packed tightly with sand and gravel to ensure it sat level and immobile amongst its neighbors. This was a process repeated thousands of times along the length of the spine of the Andes. Water was the road's most formidable adversary. In the highlands, seasonal rains could be torrential, transforming gentle slopes into conduits of erosive power. The Inca engineers had designed an elaborate system of drainage to mitigate this threat, but this system required its own constant maintenance. Stone-lined drainage channels ran alongside the road, designed to capture runoff and direct it away from the main thoroughfare. These channels had to be perpetually cleared of silt, leaves, and stones that would otherwise cause them to overflow. The Great Road, the Qhapaq Ñan, was more than an artery of movement. It was the physical manifestation of a nervous system, a complex network through which the imperial will of Cusco was transmitted to the furthest reaches of Tawantinsuyu, the empire of the Four Quarters. To comprehend the road is to comprehend the intricate and deeply organized system of administration that gave it purpose. From the imperial capital, a web of authority, information, and obligation radiated outwards, and the road was the conduit for every thread. At the heart of this system lay the principle of absolute centralization. All power, all authority, and all major decisions emanated from one place, the sacred city of Cusco, the navel of the world, and from one individual, the Sapa Inca, the unique Inca, the son of the sun. He was the terminus of all information and the origin of all commands. The imperial administration was structured as a rigid, decimal-based hierarchy. The empire itself was divided into 4 great provinces, or suyus, which met at the central plaza in Cusco. Each suyu was governed by an apu, a high-ranking noble, typically a close relative of the Sapa Inca, who formed part of the imperial council. These 4 counselors advised the Sapa Inca on all matters of state, from military campaigns to the allocation of resources for large-scale public works, including the maintenance and expansion of the road itself. Below the apis, the provincial hierarchy was meticulously organized. Each province was subdivided into smaller administrative units, based on a decimal system of households. A governor, known as a tokoirakok, or he who sees all, was responsible for a region containing, in theory, tens of thousands of households. These governors were the eyes and ears of the Sapa Inca in the provinces. They traveled their jurisdictions, using the Qhapaq Ñan to conduct inspections, adjudicate disputes, and ensure that the directives from Cusco were being faithfully executed. They oversaw the collection of tribute in the form of labor and goods, and they monitored the state of the infrastructure within their purview, including the condition of the road, its bridges, and the network of storehouses and lodgings that lined its path. This chain of command extended downward to the level of local leaders, the Qullqas. The Inca state, in a pragmatic display of administrative acumen, did not typically displace the traditional leaders of conquered peoples. Instead, it co-opted them, incorporating the Qullqas into the bottom rungs of the imperial bureaucracy. The Qullqa was responsible for the day-to-day governance of his community, or Ailu, but he was now also an agent of the Inca state. His primary responsibility to the empire was the mobilization of his people to fulfill their labor tax, the mita. This included providing workers for state farms, for the army, and most critically for our subject, for the construction and perpetual maintenance of the Qhapaq Ñan. The Qullqa was the crucial link between the abstract demands of the central state and the tangible labor of the common people. Directives for road repair, for the reweaving of a suspension bridge, or for the construction of a new set of stone stairs on a mountain pass would flow from Cusco down through the Suyu and provincial administrators to the local Qullqa, who would then be tasked with organizing the work crews from the households under his authority. For such a vast and complex administrative machine to function, the flow of information had to be swift, accurate, and reliable. The Inca, lacking a system of alphabetic writing, developed a unique and sophisticated solution for data management, the Khipu. The Khipu, a collection of knotted strings, was the empire's primary tool for record-keeping. At its most fundamental level, it was a portable, three-dimensional spreadsheet. A main, primary cord would form the backbone, from which numerous pendant strings would hang. In the vast, rugged expanse of the Andean highlands, the Inca Empire constructed a marvel of pre-industrial engineering, the Qhapaq Ñan, the Great Inca Road. This network, stretching over 40,000 kilometers, was the empire's circulatory system. Its spine, along it moved armies, officials, goods, and information. Yet, this sophisticated state, a bureaucracy capable of managing millions of people across deserts, mountains, and jungles, possessed no system of writing as we understand it. There were no glyphs, no characters, no alphabet. The question that arises is therefore fundamental. How does an empire maintain control, levy taxes, conduct a census, and manage the intricate logistics of supply and demand without the written word? The answer lies not on stone or parchment, but in the subtle and complex language of twisted fibers and intricate knots. The answer is the Khipu. The Khipu, which translates from the Quechua language as simply knot, was the Inca solution to data storage and transmission. At first glance, it appears to be a simple, almost decorative object, a fringe of colored strings hanging from a thicker primary cord. But this initial impression belies a system of profound complexity, a three-dimensional method for encoding and recording vast quantities of information. To understand the maintenance of the Inca Road, one must first understand the tool that made its management possible. Let us begin with the physical construction of a standard Khipu. The foundation of the device is the primary cord, a central, often thicker string from which all other elements depend. This cord could vary in length from a few centimeters to over a meter, and was typically fashioned from spun and plied cotton, or, less frequently, the wool of llamas or alpacas. Attached to this primary cord are the pendant cords. These are the main data-carrying strings, hanging downwards like the teeth of a comb. They were attached to the primary cord with a simple loop or a cow hitch, allowing them to be spaced at precise intervals. The number of pendant cords on a single Khipu could range from a handful to well over 1,000, each one a potential line in a tactile ledger. The information was not limited to these primary pendants. A further layer of complexity was introduced through the use of subsidiary cords. These were smaller strings attached not to the main primary cord but to one of the pendant cords. A subsidiary cord could in turn have its own subsidiary cords attached to it, creating a branching, hierarchical structure of data. This arrangement allowed for the aggregation of information. For example, a pendant cord might represent a specific village, or ailu. Subsidiary cords attached to it could then break down the village's population by age, gender, or occupation. A further subsidiary on one of those could perhaps specify the number of individuals fit for military service. The system was infinitely scalable, a nested database rendered in fiber. The informational content of a Khipu was encoded through several variables, the most obvious of which was the knot. The Inca Qhapaq, the specialist keepers and readers of the Khipu, employed a base 10 or decimal positional system. The value of a knot was determined by its type and its position on the pendant cord. The positions were organized in levels, with the lowest level, nearest the bottom tip of the pendant cord, representing the one's place. Moving up the cord towards the primary cord, one would encounter the tens place, then the hundreds, the thousands, and so on, up to the 10,000s place on some surviving examples. There were three primary types of knots used to represent these numerical values. For the ones place, a special knot called the long knot was often used. A long knot with, for instance, 4 turns within it represented the number 4. It was a single, elegant knot that encapsulated a value from 1 to 9 based on its internal twists. To comprehend the Qhapaq Ñan solely as a feat of engineering or an instrument of logistical control is to perceive only its most superficial dimension. Its stone-paved surfaces and meticulously constructed retaining walls served purposes that transcended the movement of armies, goods, and information. The great Inca Road System was, in its deepest essence, a physical manifestation of a spiritual worldview, a vast, linear temple that organized and consecrated the very land it traversed. This chapter explores the road not as a path across a landscape, but as a path through a sacred geography, a network of ceremonial conduits that connected the human realm to the divine. The Inca understanding of the world was one in which the landscape was not inert, but animate and imbued with sacred power. Mountains, rivers, springs, caves, and even unusually shaped rocks were not merely features of the terrain. They were wakas, sacred entities, places of ancestral origin, and points of direct interface with the supernatural world. The most powerful of these, the great snow-capped mountain peaks, were known as apis, considered to be ancestral deities who watched over the communities below. The Qhapaq Ñan was designed to interact with this sacred topography in a deliberate and profound manner. The road did not conquer the landscape, It paid deference to it, articulating its inherent holiness. The construction of the road itself was a ritual act. Each stone, quarried and shaped with immense labor, was placed not just for stability, but as an offering. The path was a carefully delineated line, separating the ordered, human-controlled space of the empire from the wild, untamed world beyond. To walk upon its paved surface was to be within the protected, sanctified realm of the Inca state. The road's course was often determined not by the most efficient route, but by the necessity of approaching a huaca in a ritually appropriate way. A path might deviate for kilometers to pass by a sacred spring, or to align with the slope of a venerated mountain. Platforms and viewing stations were constructed at specific points, not for rest, but to provide a perfectly framed view of a distant Apu, allowing the traveler to pause and make the necessary offerings and prayers. The very act of journeying along the road was a continuous act of worship, a pilgrimage through a living, breathing cathedral of earth and stone. Nowhere is this integration of the physical and the sacred more apparent than in the conceptual layout of the empire's heart, the city of Cusco. From the Coricancha, the great temple of the sun, emanated a system of invisible lines known as Sikhs. These 41 conceptual pathways radiated outwards, organizing the surrounding territory like the spokes of a wheel. Along each sequi were situated a series of huacas in a precise and hierarchical order. These could be the tombs of ancestors, significant rock outcroppings, battlefields, or sources of water. This system was a mnemonic device, a spiritual map that encoded the history, mythology, and social organization of the Inca world. The Qhapaq Ñan did not always follow these invisible lines directly, but it functioned as the physical armature that connected the territories organized by the sects. It was the tangible thread that allowed for ritual movement between the huacas, giving physical form to the sacred geometry that ordered the Inca cosmos. A procession leaving Cusco along one of the four great roads that departed from the central plaza was not just traveling to a province, it was moving along a primary axis of this sacred grid, reactivating the spiritual connections that bound the periphery to the center. The most profound ceremonial use of the Qhapaq Ñan was for the state-sponsored ritual of the Capacocha. This was the ultimate imperial sacrifice, performed at times of great crisis or significant celebration, such as the death of a Sapa Inca or a major military victory. The arrival of Francisco Pizarro and his small contingent of conquistadors on the shores of Tawantinsuyu in 1532 marked the beginning of a profound and violent transformation. Central to this transformation, in a way the invaders could never have anticipated, was the very instrument of Inca imperial cohesion, the Great Inca Road, the Qhapaq Ñan. This vast, sophisticated network, the empire's spine, was designed to move armies, administrators, goods, and information with unparalleled efficiency under the direction of the Sapa Inca. Yet with the catastrophic fracturing of that central authority, this masterpiece of engineering and logistics would become something else entirely. It would become an enemy's highway, a pre-paved route for its own subjugation. This chapter examines the deep irony of the Spanish conquest, where the logistical triumph of the Inca state was turned against itself, facilitating a rapid invasion while also presenting its own unique and unforeseen set of frictions. When the first Spanish horsemen moved inland from the coast, they were stepping into a landscape wholly alien to their European experience. The Andes presented a vertical challenge of a scale they had rarely encountered. Yet they did not have to forge their own paths. They found them already laid out before them, a clear and undeniable testament to the power they sought to overthrow. The chroniclers of the expedition, men like Pedro Pizarro and Miguel de Estete, recorded their astonishment. They described causeways wide enough for several horsemen to ride abreast, raised above marshy ground on foundations of stone. They marveled at roads cut into sheer rock faces with formidable retaining walls of fitted stone holding back the mountainside. On the arid coast, they noted low walls flanking the road, designed to keep the shifting desert sands from obscuring the path. This was not the rudimentary trackway of a primitive chiefdom. This was the infrastructure of a true empire, and it was now at their disposal. The primary and most immediate advantage the Qhapaq Ñan offered the invaders was speed. The Inca Road System was engineered for the foot traffic of Chasquis runners and the slow, steady pace of Llama caravans. It was not designed for the hoofed animals of the Old World. Nevertheless, in the vast open stretches of the high plains, the altiplano, or along the coastal deserts, the paved or well-compacted surfaces provided an exceptionally efficient route for cavalry. The Spanish horse was the single greatest technological and psychological advantage they possessed. It allowed for shock tactics, rapid flanking maneuvers, and a terrifying battlefield presence. The Qhapaq Ñan amplified this advantage immeasurably. Instead of being slowed by difficult terrain, forced to scout uncertain paths, or hack their way through vegetation, Pizarro's forces could move with a speed that the Inca command structure, already in disarray from civil war, simply could not counter. The road guided them directly from one major settlement to the next, from Cajamarca, the site of Atahualpa's capture, southward toward the imperial heartland of Cusco. The empire's own circulatory system was now carrying a poison to its core. Of equal, if not greater, logistical importance was the network of way stations, the Tampus, that dotted the Qhapaq Ñan at regular intervals. These were not mere rest stops. The Tampus were the fundamental nodes of the Inca state's logistical and administrative apparatus. Placed approximately a day's walk apart, they were vast storage complexes and lodging houses. Under Inca rule, they were kept meticulously stocked through the Mita labor system and the empire's command economy. They contained everything an imperial army or official might need: immense quantities of freeze-dried potatoes, called chuño, and dried llama meat, or charqui, foodstuffs that could be stored for years. There were silos filled with maize and quinoa. The integrity of a system is measured not only by its function in times of stability, but by its resilience in the face of profound disruption. The Qhapaq Ñan, the great Inca road, was more than a network of pathways. It was the circulatory system of an empire, a physical manifestation of centralized power, social cohesion, and economic reciprocity. Its maintenance was a constant, collective, and sacred duty. Yet, a system so exquisitely tuned to its specific cultural and environmental context is, by its very nature, fragile when confronted with forces that operate outside of its fundamental logic. The collapse of this system was not a single event, but a protracted process of disarticulation, a slow and inexorable unraveling precipitated by internal strife and accelerated by external invasion. The first tremors that shook the empire's spine originated from within. The death of the Sapa Inca Huayna Qhapaq around the year 1527, likely from a European disease that had traveled south far ahead of its bearers, created a power vacuum. This void was filled by a devastating war of succession between his sons, Huáscar and Atahualpa. This conflict, a brutal schism in the Tawantinsuyu, was the first major rupture in the road's operational continuity. For years, the Qhapaq Ñan ceased to be a conduit for peaceful administration and became a theater of war. Armies numbering in the tens of thousands marched along its lengths, their logistical needs straining the capacity of the tambos, the state-run storehouses and lodgings. The delicate balance of supply and demand, managed by the state through the use of Qullqas, or knotted cord records, was thrown into disarray. Stored goods, from dried llama meat to sandals and textiles, were consumed not for state projects or ceremonial redistribution, but for military campaigns. The constant movement of troops placed unprecedented wear on the road's infrastructure. Paved sections were damaged by the relentless tramp of sandals and the passage of heavy supply trains. The Chasquis, the imperial relay runners, now carried not administrative decrees or census data, but urgent military intelligence, their life-sustaining network co-opted for internecine conflict. More critically, the system of maintenance itself began to falter. The mita, the rotational labor tax that provided the manpower for all public works, was diverted. Communities that would have sent laborers to repair bridges, clear rockfalls, or shore up retaining walls were instead compelled to send their able-bodied men to fight. The local Qullqas, or chieftains, who organized these labor drafts, were forced to align with one faction or the other, their administrative duties secondary to the existential demands of war. Suspension bridges, woven from ICHU grass and requiring replacement every 1 to 2 years, were a particular point of vulnerability. A neglected bridge could sever a vital artery of communication and transport. A deliberately destroyed bridge, a common tactic in the Civil War, could isolate an entire region. The system, for the first time, was being actively used to disintegrate the empire, rather than to bind it together. It was upon this already fractured and weakened empire that Francisco Pizarro and his small contingent of conquistadors arrived in 1532. Their arrival represented not merely a political or military challenge, but a conceptual one. The Spanish brought with them technologies, animals, diseases, and an economic ideology for which the Inca system had no parallel and no defense. The Qhapaq Ñan, the instrument of Inca consolidation, ironically became the primary tool of its own subjugation. The conquistadors recognized the road's strategic value immediately. It allowed their small force to move with astonishing speed through rugged, unfamiliar terrain. The paved, well-graded surfaces, designed for foot traffic and Llama caravans, were perfectly suited for the movement of Spanish cavalry. The great imperial project of the Tawantinsuyu, the Inca Empire, has receded into the annals of history. Its armies no longer march, its Chasquis no longer run with messages tied to Qullqas, and its governors no longer dispense justice from stone administrative centers. Yet the empire's most enduring legacy, its vast and intricate road system, the Qhapaq Ñan, has not vanished. It persists not merely as a collection of archaeological remnants, but as a living, breathing component of the contemporary Andean landscape. This chapter explores the state of the Qhapaq Ñan today, its physical condition, its continued use by descendant communities, the complex challenges to its preservation, and the international efforts to safeguard it as a unique heritage of humanity. The physical state of the Qhapaq Ñan in the 21st century is one of fragmentation. Of the estimated 40,000 kilometers that once integrated the empire, only sections remain visible and traversable. Its condition varies dramatically depending on geography and human activity. In the high, arid punas of Peru, Bolivia, and northern Chile, segments of the road are remarkably well preserved. Here, far from significant urban development, the original Inca engineering is starkly evident. One can still walk for kilometers on stone-paved causeways, flanked by low retaining walls constructed in the characteristic Qhapaq style of fitted fieldstones. The stairways, carved directly into the bedrock to conquer steep inclines, remain functional, their steps worn smooth by 5 centuries of footfalls and the passage of llamas. In these remote altitudes, the road appears as a clear, deliberate line drawn across a vast and unforgiving landscape, a silent testament to the organizational power that created it. Conversely, in the lower valleys and coastal plains, the road has often been absorbed or erased. The expansion of modern cities such as Cusco, Quito, or Lima has paved over entire sections, incorporating them into the grid of urban streets, their ancient alignment detectable only through careful cartographic and archaeological analysis. In fertile agricultural zones, centuries of plowing have obliterated the road's surface, leaving only subtle variations in soil composition or crop marks visible from the air. Along the desert coast of Peru, where the road was often demarcated by low adobe walls or simple stone markers, wind and erosion have rendered many segments almost invisible to the untrained eye, traceable only as faint linear depressions in the sand. The material legacy is therefore a mosaic of preservation and loss, a discontinuous thread weaving through 6 modern nations. Yet to view the Qhapaq Ñan solely as a decaying monument is to miss its most profound contemporary significance. For countless Andean communities, the road has never ceased to be a functional pathway. It is not a ruin, it is a utility. In regions where modern vehicular roads are non-existent or impassable for much of the year, these ancient Inca trails remain the primary conduits for local travel and commerce. Herders guide their flocks of llamas and alpacas along the same stone paths their ancestors used, moving between seasonal pastures. Farmers walk these routes to reach their agricultural plots, or chakras, located in different ecological zones, a practice of vertical archipelago agriculture that has deep pre-Columbian roots. Villagers travel between settlements for market days, festivals, and family visits, their footsteps maintaining the road's physical integrity through continuous use. This ongoing utility is deeply interwoven with a persistent spiritual dimension. The road is not simply a physical space, but a cultural and cosmological one. Along its course, one still finds apachetas, small cairns of stones built by travelers over generations. Each stone is an offering, a gesture of respect to the Apis, the powerful mountain deities, and a prayer for safe passage. And so, the great roads fall silent, the echoes of a million footsteps fading into the mountain mist. The work is done, the message is delivered. Thank you for walking these ancient paths with us on the Whispered Lore. Now, let the steady rhythm of those forgotten travelers guide you into your own journey toward peaceful slumber. Let your mind drift and your body find its ease. Rest well. Good night.